But in all seriousness, Caitlin
Yeah.
Clark, obviously, she is the alpha and the omega of women's basketball, and has been one of. I mean, if you think about it, of all of the top sports celebrities we have in this country, she's in the top 10 easily.
Oh, by far.
And I'm talking all sports. I mean, we're talking LeBron. We're talking,
she has entered into a different
Patrick
stratosphere
Mahomes.
Over the last couple of
right.
years.
We're talking about the elite of the elite. If she's not in that group, she's banging on the door like Connor was a few minutes ago.
Just staring at us.
She is right
Caitlin,
there.
what are you doing looking into the zone studio at the ballpark?
And there's been a lot of conversation and speculation about what is going to be the Caitlin Clark effect. We obviously know they drew 12 million viewers for a regional final. It's never been done in women's basketball history. It was an audience bigger than last year's title game that she was in. So the popularity is only growing. There's been a lot of talk about what she could mean for the WNBA and what she will mean when she leaves women's college basketball.
Yes.
Will the sport take a dive in popularity, or will this be the ushering in of, will she be kind of the Pied Piper that leads in a new era? But it does beg the question, moving on to her future prospects. 1979, Bird and Magic, most watched NCAA men's basketball game of all time. It was really the game that brought the Final Four and the men's tournament to the levels it now enjoys today. It was the gateway to making this.
Do you remember it?
Yes.
Okay. Why was that was it just that you knew who they were? Was it the undefeated season?
They were stars.
Yeah.
They were both stars. Yes. And Indiana State was undefeated, but they were both big stars.
So you knew who they were. It wasn't this out of nowhere thing. By the time the title game arrived, everyone was excited to watch Bird versus Magic. I just looked it up. It drew a 24.1 rating. I don't know how many millions of people watched it, but it is the highest rating a championship game has ever had. And obviously that begat then the NBA really taking off,
because
leaving tape delay behind.
Because those two entered the NBA at the same time, and they became great rivals.
And then they played in 3 NBA finals.
And it did. It ushered in a new era of popularity of the NBA. And so the question is, could Caitlin Clark do the same thing for the WNBA?
Yeah, and I mean, so you think about right now and the interest level that suddenly we have seen in the sport. And look, I am not going to pretend like I have been this, dyed-in-the-wool WNBA or women's college basketball fan throughout the majority of my life. I have not.
No.
And I certainly was not as a young – I was like a typical young teenage boy. Women's college basketball is stupid. I didn't watch the sport.
Right.
Now, part of this is that I have – gotten to call over the last decade and change now many women's basketball games, majority of them Creighton. I think I've called maybe one non-Creighton Nebraska basketball game, women's basketball game, and I guess a few in college too when I was at Lincoln. But I have grown to really love and appreciate the sport, and I it's not just doing it in person, it is getting to watch it on television. But it's pretty obvious that the game is having a moment right now where it went from this kind of underground, not so much underground, but it seemed like there was like a typical type of women's college basketball fan. I don't think that I'm out of pocket in saying that.
No.
And I think that you don't get 12 point whatever million viewers because it's a bunch of women's college basketball hipsters, for lack of a better phrase, but because you are drawing in a national audience. And that's why I wanted to ask you about the 79 game, because that happens and it leads into the 80s in the NBA. And remember, the NBA entering the 80s, the NBA in 1980 with Magic Johnson versus the 76ers, the Lakers versus the Sixers, that was still a tape-delayed finals, which is incredible when you consider what happened by the time that 1984 rolled around when it was Celtics versus Lakers, by the time 1988 rolled around and it was Lakers versus Pistons, which was the most watched basketball game in the NBA until then Michael Jordan took things into an entirely different stratosphere. There were a lot of people that if there was sports talk in Twitter in 1979, they would have said, you know what they would have said? Why is Magic Johnson? I mean, I guess there wasn't NIL, but why is he leaving? Why would he want to go to the NBA? Yeah. College basketball is where it's at. And then the NBA took off in a way that, I don't think that any of us would have foresaw. And so in a way, I guess we're trying to kind of predict, like, will the WNBA have the similar type of tale. I can tell you this. I am much more interested in that product than I have ever been before when she enters into the league. And it certainly seems like there are a lot of women's basketball stars at this exact moment that are all about to go into the league, which has already gotten more talented in recent years. And you wonder if this can be the beginning of something different. I'll tell you this, ESPN is going to throw their weight behind it, given what has happened.
They'll promote the ever love. I mean, they promote it pretty heavily anyway because they have an investment in it.
Correct.
But it will be over the top.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
that first game, I bet the Chit Chat shows will be doing pregame not pregame coverage. They will do their shows probably from the arena.
Yes.
They will do their shows from the city, and she'll play for Indiana. They will do the shows from Indianapolis or wherever her first game is. I think that
they'll make the schedule to make sure that it is the most attractive possible matchup because it's all about this. And by the way, if you're curious, the WNBA season begins in mid-May and ends. The playoffs start in late September, and then the last possible date for the WNBA finals is October 20th. So it goes through the summer and ends in the middle of football season.
Yeah.
And I think if there is an opportunity, certainly in the regular season, to build up some momentum, this is a good calendar for them because the only real competition they'll have is Major League Baseball. And Major League Baseball is obviously it's different now.
Dog days of summer.
It's different now in how people consume baseball. Baseball is very much a localized regional sport where, fans follow the teams in their region, but the national broadcasts on Fox and ESPN don't get that big a viewership. That's just the way people now consume baseball. So the potential for a singular WNBA game featuring a star like this, drawing in a pretty sizable number on a random Saturday or Sunday whenever they might play the game, the potential is certainly there. Now, will it carry over? The thing that doesn't exist here, and I know Angel Clark, she just declared from LSU. Angel Reese, I'm sorry. You had Magic versus Bird.
Correct.
It was two guys going in together as one and became a rivalry. We've seen that.
And then we got lucky to get that matchup in the finals multiple times.
And my guess is that wherever Reese ends up and wherever Clark ends up, there's going to be some intrigue there because
that will be one of the national television games. Certainly,
there's a past between those two. But
throw in Paige Beckers as well, and that's what Asian Joe
sure.
says. Caitlin Clark does more for the WNBA than women's NCAA basketball. The WNBA has stars like Sabrina, but it needs more recognizable figures like Clark, Reese, and Beckers to add depth to the league.
Yeah, Clark is just different altogether. Where this is a national phenomenon.
What is – I keep asking this question, and you were gone at the very end of the regular season and throughout a lot of the women's Big Ten tournament. What is it about her that she has been able to cut through all of this? And I do have an answer to my own question, and that is that she reminds a lot of us, I think, of Steph Curry, and she is shooting these logo threes.
Yeah.
But she is not the first good women's basketball player. Paige Beckers is still in the sport. They will play each other on Friday night, which is, just awesome. What is it about her, John? You were a PA guy for many, many years for a women's college basketball team. So you have been around throughout the Tennessee days, throughout the UConn days. You have been around for the explosion in popularity. Brittany Griner, this is different. This is different than anything that I can ever remember in the sport. And it's an obvious statement. Her game just got 12 plus million viewers the other night. What is it about her, do you think? Is it just the obvious? She takes deep threes and she plays a unique brand of basketball.
I mean, the Steph Curry component or the Steph Curry comparison is very apt. Plus, there's a flair to her game. She's also the type of person that can be polarizing. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't like her, and they like to nitpick
100%.
her behavior on the court or if she's pouting or anything like that.
Flopping.
And flopping. So there's a lot there. I mean, she's one of those people who, can play the face and play the heel right? When she's making
like all good stars, honestly.
Like all good stars. I mean,
Patrick Mahomes, he is loved and hated by a lot of people that watch the sport.
And yes, there's a lot. There's an element of greatness to it. There has to be an element of great skill and great performance that goes into it. But then it's the way that it is done, and I think all of those things together, have combined into this. And I think part of this too, and I think this part of the conversation is being ignored a little bit. And I don't bring it up to just say, well, yeah, but we are in an era now, because of the way the television audience is fractured, that live sports properties almost across the board are all seeing some kind of bounce, whether it's in local ratings or in national ratings. And those properties have become more valuable because there's no longer the must-see event. Literally, NBC Thursday night was called must-see TV because the only time you could watch the episode of Friends or Seinfeld or Cheers was when it happened. Correct. And not many people were using VCRs at the time. And we didn't have DVRs at the time.
And you had to wait for reruns, but you didn't know which rerun you were going to get.
Exactly. And on-demand programming did not exist. And now you're seeing scripted television is no longer, hey, it's an event. I got to be there exactly when it happens or I'm going to miss out. The only thing that exists are live news and live sports. And live sports is obviously something, live news, breaking news, that can't be scheduled.
Correct.
Live sports is scheduled, and it's become a lot more valuable as a property. So I do think some of this, not all of it, but some of this rise that we're seeing in the popularity of women's sports, especially basketball and volleyball, can be attributed to just an overall rise of live sports. But when it comes to Caitlin Clark, this is something that takes it to another level. And it just shows you that it's why the growth of the NFL, if you really look back in the history, is rather unique. Yes, there have been great players and great stars, but that was something where the sport became the centerpiece. The sport became
the draw was the sport.
Thing. The draw was the sport, the drama, the physicality, all of it.
Whereas like basketball needs stars.
Where basketball needs stars.
Yeah.
They need people to usher in. When the NBA kind of fell into a lull post Jordan, they didn't have those types of stars.
They needed LeBron.
It took Kobe, it took LeBron and Steph to bring it back up again. And it's the same thing here. And I think we are now also moving. Josh, remember, we now have a generation, your generation, Nick's generation, who it was a lot more normalized that women competed in sports. Mm-hmm. In my generation, yes, we had girls and women's sports, but they were always on the back burner. They were always in the background. They were always ignored. But since, we've seen more, dare I say, women's empowerment and things like that, those were things that your generation, it became normalized.
It's commonplace.
It became commonplace. So
it's a long tail of Title IX, right?
Yes.
TAIL.
So I think, there have been people, granted, not with the exact same skill set, but yeah, there have been little Rebecca Lobos of the world, the Cheryl Swoops, others, other great women stars.
Lisa Leslie.
But they happened in an era where people still looked down their nose at women's sports. We're now about, I would dare say, 15-ish, 20-ish years into women's sports now is more readily acceptable societally, that it's okay for girls to play sports. And it's been that way for a generation. And so I think that also has helped. And now you've got this first real amazing unicornish like superstar rising up in an era where women's sports has been normalized and it's accepted by society, and it's created this perfect storm that has seen the rise in popularity of these events.
And let's add on top of it too, for the matchup that drew the most watched women's basketball game ever. Let's not pretend too that race didn't play a part in it as well, just like Magic and Bird.
Oh, yeah.
White player versus black player. And what was so interesting about that to me is like the Kim Mulkey of it all, because when I think of Kim Mulkey, I'm not going to think of her rosters or her as a person, maybe like I would have like a John Thompson back in the day, for example. But I think that race, it's always going to play a part in it. Yeah. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. A couple other comments that I think are good. Asian Joe says the timing, the way she plays combined with this day age of social media. And Max says something, I think she is different because the three-point shooting can be just as good as the men's game. And she does that. Let's be real. Griner couldn't dunk like a Shaq, LeBron, Zion. Clark shoots like Steph. I think that is spot on where, what was one of the disses that people had against women's basketball for so many years? It's like old people like it because it reminds them of the 50s because they're playing
because it played
below
slower,
the rim.
Below the rim.
This and like, look, right now, women's basketball, they're not dunking like they are in the men's game at any level. But the game has evolved and changed.
And the three-point shot is now more exciting than the dunk.
I keep saying it, but Paige Beckers, because I have had a chance to see her in person, is the best player that I have ever watched in person in the women's game. And the way in which she handles the ball, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible. So I think that what Max says there, I think he really hits on something.